Hello, nonverbal communication students. This is part 2 on chapter 12 in the nonverbal textbook, Nonverbal Communication for a Lifetime, Ivy and Wall. And so we're in chapter 12, which is the last chapter of the textbook, and it's on nonverbal cues, sex and gender, and sexuality, intimate relationships. So this is a sometimes controversial chapter, kind of an intimate chapter in terms of talking about some topics that some people may be a little uncomfortable with. But we're going to cover that and take it in a few chunks so that we can kind of digest the information together. We're starting on page 437 with nonverbal cues in intimate relationships. Now, everybody's got their definition of intimacy, right? It can differ from person to person, couple to couple, family to family. Some friendships are more intimate than others. That means maybe there's more disclosure. But some people equate intimacy with sexual activity. I do not. I know that they're related, but intimacy, sometimes you can have sexual activity and there's no intimacy, correct? But we are looking at intimate or possibly romantic relationships, might be another way of talking about it. What nonverbal cues are connected to the development and the maintenance and sometimes the termination of intimate or romantic relationships? Those are the three stages that we typically talk about and that the research covers is the initiation stage. How do I get a romantic relationship going? Is there such a thing as dating anymore? A lot of my students don't date anymore. It's too expensive and it makes you cray cray. So a lot of my students don't date, but they hang out or we're talking. Talking is an interesting euphemism for what we used to call dating. I don't think anybody says we're courting anymore. That takes you way back, doesn't it? I, I never even courted. That's bizarre, but that's the old-fashioned term for it. So on page 438, we start talking about relationship initiation. So what nonverbal cues are important in trying to connect with somebody and have a relationship? And now we know a lot of those things nowadays get started with apps, get started with all kinds of dating apps. It used to be dating services like eHarmony, which I guess is still around, Match.com, Farmers.com, or whatever. There's a dating app for farmers, if you didn't know that. Good tidbit. But a lot of it is now Tinder and Bumble and even Grindr, and there's probably 15 new ones that I don't even know about yet. So folks are using some dating apps, but there's some nonverbal cues involved in that. If you use the dating app for making some kind of a connection, particularly if you want more of a relationship and not just a hookup, whatever. Okay, so relationship initiation, what's important? Well, all kinds of nonverbal cues are important. Of course, physical appearance, being attracted to someone, attracted to them sexually, physically, or emotionally, or spiritually, or intellectually. There's all kinds of attraction. I want you to take a look on page 438. We emphasize Shefflin's work. Albert Shefflin has given us a lot in the nonverbal communication field. And one of the things Shefflin has given us is quasi-courtship behavior. When something is quasi, it means it's kind of like the thing, but it's not really the thing. So quasi-courtship is different than courtship. It looks kind of like courtship, but there's a different purpose. Quasi-courtship is an interesting phenomenon. Typically with quasi-courtship, there is no intended outcome. It's different than flirting because flirting can be an intended outcome. There can be an end result or an end game. There can be an objective when one is flirting with someone else. Sometimes there's not an objective. It's just to kind of have a little fun or spark something, kind of different. But quasi-courtship has four stages. And if you would take a look on there's a box on page 439 that summarizes the four stages of quasi-courtship. If you know what to watch for, you will see this happening all the time. It's very interesting. It happens in same-sex connections. It's been studied more in I wouldn't say opposite sex, but it's been studied more in male-female relationships or in heterosexual couplings or connections. But take a look at that. There are different nonverbal cues associated with the different stages. I encourage you to take a look at that on your own. And then do a little observation whenever you get a chance to be social. See if any quasi-courtship nonverbal cues are going on. A lot of it is positioning. A lot of it is a rhythm or a synchrony that conversational partners can get into, where they move sort of in sync and mirror one another's nonverbal cues. If the mirroring isn't going on, it's possible that any kind of flirtation or connection may not happen because we register that. We feel that on kind of an interesting level of, am I clicking with this person? Is this a fit? Is this, are we cooking? Are we, is this working? And so sometimes we get a feeling of that. I think sometimes things that are called intuition, particularly women's intuition, men have intuition too. But sometimes these things that are called intuition, I think is us actually processing nonverbal cues on either a subconscious or maybe kind of a deeper or more subtle kind of level. And so we get kind of hit off of somebody, we get a feeling or something off of somebody. I don't know that that's some, oh, I've got intuition or some great, ability. It may be just us processing nonverbal cues, and a lot of them on a kind of a subtle level. In terms of relationship initiation, things like eye contact is important, vocal animation, facial animation, how you space yourself with another person, and of course, if the relationship initiation is all happening online or through a dating app, all of these nonverbal cues are affected and changed by that, right? So probably attraction is the main one. Another very strong nonverbal cue in a situation where you have a face-to-face relationship that is being initiated or launched. Affection, touch is very, very important. And so those are nonverbal cues, very important and connected to relationship initiation. Page 441, we start relationship maintenance. Some of the same nonverbal cues in initiation are important in maintenance, but some of them shift a little bit. Sometimes if you watch a couple out in public or at a party or something, sometimes if you know what to look for, you can tell, are they in the early throes of this relationship? It's kind of cute. Maybe there's some awkwardness. Maybe there's some nervousness that you can say. Maybe they can't keep their hands off each other, and so there's those PDAs, public displays of affection. Once you're more in a maintenance or an ongoing phase, some of these nonverbal shift. Some of the nonverbal cues shift. Maybe you're a little more comfortable with one another and you don't have as much touch. Doesn't mean there's anything wrong. It just means maybe things are shifting a little bit. Maybe you don't have to have those demonstrations that are usually done nonverbally to the other person that, hey, I'm into this and I'm with you and we're in a relationship. Maybe there's a little more trust, a little more understanding. Maybe you know each other better. So your nonverbal cues may reflect a different level of comfort with someone. So take a look at that. Then on page 444, we start the section on relational conflict and what the research calls relationship dissolution. Try to say that phrase 3 times fast. Relationship dissolution, which is kind of the ending or the termination of relationships, the good old-fashioned breakup, right? So there are nonverbal cues associated with conflict, big time. One nonverbal cue you might not be thinking of that's associated with relationship conflict is silence. Giving somebody the silent treatment. A lot of us, me included, are pretty conflict avoidant. We don't like conflict. It tears us up, and we will avoid conflict. Now, sometimes we hold on to stuff, right? And we get that passive-aggressive thing where we're just like burying and stuffing the irritation or the anger or whatever the emotions are. And then, boom, out that stuff comes in some big knockdown, drag out kind of awful thing. Not the greatest strategy in the world, but everybody comes at conflict differently. A lot of how you do conflict is what you learned at home in those early stages. There's a lot of different nonverbal cues and a lot of different ways that relationships come apart or unravel. And so please take a look at that in this section. I'm not going to go over all of those, but there are interesting nonverbal cues that happen when a relationship starts to come apart or starts to degrade. Doesn't mean it can't change and the relationship go back up and gain its footing again and possibly even grow and maybe stabilize. But there's a unique set of nonverbal cues that are connected to relational conflict, particularly in intimate relationships, and also relationship endings. And so I ask you to take a look at that. I'm going to bring this part 2 to a close so I don't overload you with information in a long video. Thank you so much. next time.